All right, we're going to do the next text animator today, so you can see how we would do that. The playlist I have on YouTube for this class, 1900 blah, 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 I put 2 videos in there that I want you to watch before you do your next one. One of them is about typography, so just general typography rules. And then another one is about choosing colors. So just some things that will kind of help you as you're trying to pick colors and trying to lay things out on your sheet. So make sure you watch those. We also need to go through our submission form. I'm going to modify how we do this a little bit. So I have a purple book up here. I'm printing up the sheet for this one. You can grab afterwards, you can grab one of those sheets, grab this, and then fill it out at your leisure, okay? That way people are paying attention to what's on the screen versus just trying to write down as quickly as they can the stuff, okay? All right, so.
Did you ever give us our submission forms?
Not for this one. You just grab them. They're in the bins right there. All right, so this is a text animators. We're going to look at different ways to animate pieces of text. The first one that we did was animating words manually, and in some cases animating letters manually, depending on how we wanted to bring stuff in. The second one, we're using the Animate button, which I'll show you today, to animate text coming in. And there's a bunch of different things that we can do with that. The benefit of this is that it creates more of an automated process, so that in case we wanted to reuse this process or reuse this animation principle for other stuff, we could. Also, if we want to animate the text, we're right inside of After Effects. So think of like when you see the lower thirds and someone's name types out on the screen, that type of thing, we wouldn't go into Illustrator, type it out, and then bring that in After Effects. We want to do everything right inside of After Effects, okay? The next one I'm going to go over on Wednesday is using a stroke to animate a piece of text in. The one we do today is relatively simple, much more simple than the first one, okay? And I set it up that way intentionally. Even the stroke one is pretty simple. It's basically just a blunt force, like here's how you do it, and then it works out. We'll need a quote for today, so that's why I want you to find 2 quotes. And then the stroke one, you'll just need a word. Typically a short word, like 4 or 5 letters is good. You don't want anything too long because then it will take you like a week to do. All of our animations should have no text at the beginning, and then the text comes on the screen. We'll obviously be spell checking these. Our background and colors will be chosen wisely so it looks pleasant. And then everything should have a finished look. So now that we're a bit more comfortable with just the After Effects interface, we should definitely be focusing on creating a finished piece versus just going through the motions of how do we do this step, okay? So look at what colors are going to be nice together. Look at ways we can finish things like the vignette and the noise and the gradients and all that kind of stuff. I'll show some more examples today. For this one, you'll be turning in your artwork, which could be just like your quote, just kind of like laid out. That's fine. Project folder, the same stuff as before. Movie, you should have your movie with your title bumper. So you'll have your title bumper, and then you'll page transition to your first quote, page transition to the second quote, page transition to your last bit, okay? So those page transitions we just created, you can use those, or you can just make a new one if you want. 1900 is our class, points possible is 4. I graded the stuff that you guys turned in last week, and it went a lot quicker than I anticipated because about 5 people did not put their name on theirs. So there's no name, I can't grade it. So that went quicker. So when I return these today, make sure you double check if you didn't get one but you turned it in, that you make sure that yours is not one of the ones that you didn't put your name on. Okay? All right. Sorry. 4 points possible, and it'll be due on the 1st, which is a week from today. Now, again, this is going to go very quickly with the next 2. The first one takes longer because we're manually moving things around. All right. So the idea with this one is that we have a piece of text, and then we animate it coming in. So here is just a simple one. Now, the benefit of doing this also in After Effects is that we can do things like animate the whole word coming in at a time or animate individual letters coming in at a time. And depending on how we want them to move and animate in, it's very simple to kind of move things around. Also notice the finished look of this. If I get rid of all the finish and I just have it boring, that's what it looks like, right? So it gets the point across, yes, you can do it, but looking at what a finished piece looks like, I have a background color, I have a gradient vignette, I have a splash of color on there, and then I have an adjustment color just to have some more variation of what I want that to look like. And then I have this one. Let me turn off my title safe. Okay, so those are both animated in essentially the same way. It's just a matter of using this animate technique. Okay. So the first step is going through and laying out a piece of text. So I just threw this one together quickly. This is kind of like if you've ever seen a text message animation where they're showing like here's a text message animating on the screen. The neat thing is like these areas here, I think I'd have to look at my text messages. I think mine are typically on the right and theirs are on the left. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So mine would typically be typed out, right? And then theirs would be popped into frame, right? So that's the way I'm going to animate this. So these ones here will just pop in. So let's go. I don't want to hide that. I just want to scoot those down for now. All right. So I'm just going to animate the position of this one. And it's going to go like this. And then I'll wait like a half a second or so. And then I will type out the word yeah. Okay, and as I type the word yeah, their stuff has to shoot up. So as I start to type, then I will set a keyframe here. This is a bit of manual and a bit of the other one. So I'm just going to scoot this up as I start typing in my word. Okay, so and then I go to start typing in my word, and then that's when that starts moving up. And that should happen a bit quicker, I think. So just scoot those closer. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to animate the word yeah. So if I open up the arrow here next to the word, and this is just using the type tool in After Effects just like when we did our title card. So I'm not going to go through a whole lot of detail with that. I go to this animate button, and this is where all the magic is going to happen. Inside here, I can control different attributes of this. So you think of like position, where I just animated the position of this whole thing moving up. I can animate the position of this yeah coming in by going to position. So I'm going to go to position, and let me make this bigger so you can see it. All right, so I get a new thing here that says Animator, and it has a range selector, and it has a position. So this isn't going to animate exactly like it would like if it was typing on, but it'll be good enough for what we're doing. So it says range selector, start, end, and offset. Remember when we used the trim path, where we were able to just draw a line and use that start, end, offset, and that would like animate that start and end of the path. Same exact thing here. There's also a position here. This position is like the starting point of where this text is going to be. And then this animation part is actually going to be where we do all the animation. So no animation is done here. Even though there's a stopwatch, you never animate this thing. You only animate this stuff up here where it says start, end, or offset. So I'm going to take the position, and I'm going to move it to where I want this to start. So I'm going to basically just shove it off the screen. Actually, I'll go down with it. Push this down like that. There we go. So now my text is starting down here. Now when I come up to the range selector and I click and drag on this, you can see how the letters animate in. Okay?
Yeah, that's cool.
So now I just set keyframes. So start here, scoot up a little bit, go there. So now I have this. Okay, very simple. So now I need to bring in the next one. So I'm going to hit U. On the text, there's an animate button, and then you'll click position. Okay, and I'll show you more of those. Just for right now, we're just focusing on that All right, so I'll leave a little bit of time for this, to kind of sink in. And then I'm going to animate the regular position of this. Now this one's a bit more complex because I'm animating position itself and some other stuff. But I'll show you how simpler it can be. So now I'm going to go here, and then I will scoot this and Are You Nervous up. Go back to this. And I will scoot these up. Oops, I didn't advance my frame. There we go. And maybe scoot that back a little bit. There we go. I'm going to bring this one in. Oops, that's the wrong one. Bring this one in. That'll be the end spot of that one. And then I need to animate all of these moving up again so the next one can come in. All right, so now I'm going to go to Animate on that last piece of text. I'm going to go to Position. I set where I want it to start, which will be below the line. I open up the Range selector, and then I just set a Start keyframe, and that. So now if we look at it, oops, I should have a little bit more pause there. Yep, so I just need to scoot this over a touch and just copy this keyframe and paste it. So don't think that your stuff has to be perfect the first time you set keyframes. You can go through and tweak stuff as you're going.
What happens if you've already gone and pressed easy ease? You can't go back to that then?
No, you can. You would just have to copy the easy ease and then paste that in there. See, it's too slow there, so let me just scoot that. I'll scoot this over a little bit. So you see I'm just working on the timing of that. And then this happens a little bit too short, so let's make that longer. And I forgot the punctuation on that one. Cool. Okay, so that's a more complex version of what we're going to do. So I'm going to go to a new comp. I'm going to type out a phrase. Oops, I had one here. There we go. So I'm just copying and pasting this piece of text. Now before I get started on doing any animation to this, I want to verify how I want to animate these things coming in. So I have to have some kind of idea as to how this is going to work. This sentence is actually two sentences. Is this helping me become a better person? I want to become the person I want to become. If it's a clear no, then choose another path. So this is actually like several different thoughts here. So maybe, and because it's long, I probably want to break this into pieces. And let me also left justify it so it doesn't do that. There we go. Let me left justify the whole thing. There we go. All right. I'm going to take the rest of this word and click off, go to my text tool, paste it in again, and do that. And now I can just kind of play with how I want this to be laid out. Maybe I want to go person. There, that looks good. And that looks good. Okay. So then I'll pick a font. You could definitely choose stuff afterwards, but the better layout you have this inside of After Effects before you go to the next step, then the easier it's going to be to make sure everything is the way you want it to be. I'm just going to go with regular Helvetica on this. There it goes. And then I may want to, let's say, line this up like this, like that. Is helping me become, there we go. So I'm just going to emphasize a couple words here, maybe make it bold, maybe make it a different color. Maybe put it in all caps. I don't like it in all caps, maybe small caps. A little bit bigger. There we go. Check my spacing between letters and words. That's fine. I'm going to take this one, maybe stretch that out. Okay, at no point did I distort the text like that. That's a bad thing to do. Any font changes I do them right there on the font itself. And then I drop this blue, make this small caps, make this bigger. I think I also want to take my tracking or my leading and put that closer. And then I think I also want to take this and make this the other Helvetica. There we go. And then make that bigger. Okay, so this is important because as I start animating this, it's going to obviously be a lot easier to just straight up animate it versus trying to animate it, then tweak what my text looks like, then come back and animate it again, and then keep going back and forth. All right, so the first one I'm going to animate is this helping me become the person I want to be? That's the first one. That's going to be on top. I'm going to open up my arrows. I'm going to go to my Animate, and then I will find inside here what I want to do. Any one of these up here are the ones that you could do. Anchor point really wouldn't, in this case, do much for what we're doing, so I wouldn't use anchor point. What was that? Skew? It would skew the text. Okay, so that would be something I would add on top of it. So for this one, let's say that we just did scale. Okay. It works the same exact way. You set the starting point for what this is going to be. So I want it to scale down from nothing. Then when I open up the range selector, I go to start, and as I click and drag this, it's going to scale up each one of the letters. So you can see how the letters are then scaling down. Okay, so I'm going to start this off at 0. I'll scooch you up a bit. I'll put that up to 100. You don't need to do easy ease on these range selectors. Because the text is supposed to be flowing out, you don't want it to be like slow flowing at the beginning and then fast spreading and then slow again. You want it just to be like a continuous flow in this case, okay? So when we talked about easy easing things, this is one of those times where you wouldn't easy ease or go in the graph editor, okay? Unless there was a specific reason for it. All right, so there. Now, we can take this and we can add other stuff on top of this. So far all we've done is scale it up, and if you look close, you can see each one of the letters scaling up, right? There we go. Let's go to add, and then we could also do, let's say, a rotation. Okay? It works, like I said, the same exact way. We are setting the start point. You see scale is right there. You set the start point for where you want that rotation to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it start basically upside down and have it rotate back into position. So if I just set the second number here to 180, what we should get is it's going to rotate, and as it's rotating, it's also scaling. So we get this neat effect. Let me stretch this out a whole lot just so it's a little more apparent of what it's doing. Okay? Yeah. Now, just so you can see, I can add another one. Let's say I added opacity. I set the start point for the opacity, so I want this to start at 0 and then get back to where it was. And then you can see it's like fading up and rotating and scaling. Now, this could definitely get out of hand because if I just keep adding these in here, let's say I take position and I move it really far away. Right? Maybe I have too many things going on. In some cases, this may be exactly what you want. In this case, I think I've probably gone too far. If I want to get rid of one of these, I just click on the, let's say, position, and just hit delete. It removes position from the list, and now I still have scale, opacity, and rotation. Okay? Now, you can add other stuff on top of this. So up here, these are all the ways that we're animating this. You could do some of these other ones too. I just don't play with them too much. I'm going to go to Property and go to Blur. And Blur is a neat one because if I rewind this and then I crank the blur up to, let's say, 60, you can see how it's kind of like defocusing as it comes in. Okay. Now, because the opacity is on there and the scale is on there, we're kind of losing some of that. So maybe I want to take off the 2. I'll even take off rotation here. There we go. So now it's just going to scale and blur. Well, maybe I'll do, get rid of scale. Maybe I'll do opacity and blur. Okay, so now you can see how the opacity is sharpening up and then the letters coming in, beautiful. Okay, now you can use these on top of each other. So I could actually have one thing doing one item and then another thing doing another item. So let me delete this animator, and you just click on the animator and delete it. So let's say that I wanted one of these to scale, okay? So I'm going to set this back to 0. I'll set my start of this here, go to that 2, set that to 100. Okay, so now we're back to this. So just scaling up from the bottom. Then I can go to Animate, and I can add another animator. Okay, so this is one animator. I can go back to the text and add another animator for blur. And so now I have animator 1, which is scaling, animator 2, which is blurring. And now the reason we would want to do this is so that we could control them separately. So if I start there and I end here, I essentially have the same thing going on. Okay, so this is the exact same thing that it was, but now I can take the blur keyframes and maybe offset them a couple frames. So now it kind of looks like it's on top of the screen there. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Maybe one more frame back. There we go. Okay. I could also add, let's say on this one, instead of the scale being that much, let me crank the scale up. So I'm going to make the letters huge, but I'm also going to add an opacity. So what should happen now, or what it should look like, the letters are really big in front of the screen, and then they're kind of falling down and hitting the screen. Okay. Let me turn off the animator 2 so we can see it hit. That one's scaling it up, starting at a big letter and then scaling it down. Okay. So I've told it, instead of the scale being 0 at the start, to be nothing basically, that it's huge, and then it just scales itself down. What do you mean? The animator? I used scale and opacity. Those are the two that are on there. So if I don't have opacity on this, let me say I put this back to 100, it'll look like this. Right? So with opacity on there, it makes all the letters invisible until they hit the thing, right? Until it's their turn. What After Effects is doing is basically going to each letter and animating each letter individually. You can also add different selectors in here. A selector is basically how it's selecting each one of the letters. So right now it's starting at the top left and going to the bottom right. Let's say that I did Wiggly. Oh, that's crazy. It's too much, isn't it? Let's go to Wiggly Selector. Let's set this. Yeah. So it's like too much stuff is going on here with Wiggly. Let's get rid of Wiggly. Let's go and add, I'm going to take opacity off of this one. Because really I want to take the scale and make the scale wiggly, but maybe not the opacity. The opacity I want to still start off at 0 and get to 100, but the scale is like that. So let's go back to Selector, Wiggly, there we go. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to the text, I'm going to go back to Animate, I'm going to go back to opacity. And so now I have Animator 3 on here. That one's opacity is going to be at 0. Oops, I didn't animate it. I'm just going to copy this, paste this. There we go. Okay, so now you can see how they're kind of coming in all at different areas. Okay, underneath this Advanced tab, there's a whole bunch of other stuff too that we could also play with. Right now it's doing it based on characters. I could tell it to be based on lines. And if we watch how this comes in, right? So now it's like one line and then the other line. So it's not just like the individual letters coming in. We could also change this to, whoops, based on words. And now it'll do the same thing for the words. Okay, so there's different ways that you can add to this just by tweaking some of the settings that are here. You could also say randomize letters. And so now, you'll see that, well, let me put it back to letters, or characters. So now what it's doing is it's just randomly populating them. It's not all at the same time. Glorious. Okay. So that's that one. Now that's obviously too crazy. Now let's go look at this one and see all the stuff that I did to it. So I'm going to break it down just to the initial one, which was, I believe, there. Okay. So on this one here, this is what it looks like. Okay. So this is using a scale. Notice I clicked the chain on this, so it's only scaling up from the bottom. Okay, so that's all it's doing is scaling up from the bottom. Then Animator 2 is doing another scale from the bottom, but it's also doing that blur, so that's the effect that I get. Okay, if I got rid of this, so I'll set this back to 100. It would just kind of blur itself in. Yes. If I get rid of the blur, I don't think it'll do anything different. Yep, same thing I had before. Okay, and then this also has the wiggly on here so that I get a little bit of wiggliness on those things. There's regular blur. Here is wiggly blur. Okay. Now there's also another thing happening on this one. Once I had what I wanted the top one to look like, okay, so I'm like, cool, that looks good. I duplicated it and added it underneath, and then I changed the color of it. Turn that off. Oh, that's not the right one to turn off. Which one? This? Let me open it up and see. That. Okay, so I changed the color so you can see it's green and yellow. And the reason for that is if I put this underneath it, this is what I get. Okay, now I didn't want this effect, just being green and yellow. I mean, it looks kind of cool as it's coming on, but I didn't want it to stay there because it looks weird. Okay, oops. So what I did is I added another animator on this, and instead of animating the start, I animated the end. And so what that would do is basically eliminate the effect afterwards, okay? So if I go to my opacity and I say, okay, the opacity I'm going to go for is 0. Let me get rid of these end keyframes. This is how it originally starts off. Make sure that's right. Yes, yes, okay. And I use the start, you'll see how this comes on perfectly. Like that's how it comes on. If I use the end, it will animate it going off. So that's essentially what I want to do, is animate it disappearing. So I start this at 0 so that it's on the entire time. Oops, way at the beginning. And then at the end of this, it's back to 100. So basically what's going to happen is it's going to come on for just a frame. Okay, now I can offset these. Now I didn't know that right away when I started this. It's just kind of like, okay, how can I get this to happen? How can I get the text to disappear as it goes? Okay, so I did that on top of that. Yours will probably not be as complex as mine because this is your first one. But it can get complex depending on how much time you want to spend on it. Now, what also helps this is having motion blur. So you'll see there's motion blur on this. Without motion blur right there. Let me get rid of all my other effects. I just have the two texts. It's a little bit crisper with the motion blur off. So having the motion blur on there definitely helps. The rest of that's just coming from the blur itself. So the new thing that's inside this one is I have a shadow in here too. So the way I did the shadow was I made sure that my text was good, okay? I always work in stages, so don't think that I'm starting off with a background and adding all this stuff on top of it. I start off with just the text, and then I'm like, what could I add to this to make it better? Maybe add a little glitchy effect in the background. So I add a glitchy effect in the background. Cool, now I need to add a backdrop. I added a backdrop. That was this. I know I wanted to have some sort of vignette on it, so I added, that's not the vignette. So there's my vignette. And then I added this on here just to make it a little bit darker in some areas. That's my adjustment layer where I adjust some of my colors. So I just added the curves on adjustment layer. And then I'm like, okay, it looks good, but I still need to add something in here to make it pop a little bit more from the background. So I'm like, I need a shadow. That's typically what helps. I could have gone to this layer, gone to layers here, gone to layer styles, gone to drop shadow. And this gives me, just like Photoshop, just a regular drop shadow that I could then adjust the spread on, adjust the size on, take the opacity down. Oops, too much. Spread's a little bit too much. There we go. So that makes it definitely pop a little bit more. Here it is before, there it is after, a little bit more. But I wanted something that was a little bit more specific to this kind of thing. So I then took this same piece of text and duplicated it because I needed it to be able to write on, okay? The layer style would write on also, but this other effect works great. So the way that I did it is I duplicated it. Oops. And then I'm just going to look at this one layer here underneath this because it has to be in the bottom. I added a directional blur. Okay, so that blurs it a whole lot in that direction that I've chosen here. And then if I go to Effect, Channel, and I say Set Matte, it will actually create an alpha channel based on this stuff. I have to make sure this is turned off, make sure this is on, and make sure this is set to none. Oops. And then I have to make sure I grab that piece of text. There we go. And scoot it down. So now I'm just lining it up with where that is. And then I can give this a different color. So I can go to, let's say, hue and saturation. I could just darken this. Oops. Desaturate it. There we go. I can darken it some like that. What else did I use on this one? Oh, I just inverted. That's all I did. So I could do the hue and saturation. On this one, I didn't invert. Bless you. No, that's coming out. So, oh, maybe I changed the color to white in here. Yep, I did. So I changed the color to everything in there to white. That's what did it. And then change that to invert. There we go. So now I lined it up. And then I just set the mode on this to be a multiply so that it looks like it's sitting behind it. Okay? If you have a white image with a black here, if you set that to multiply, the black will stay there and the white will go away. That's what happens. And then if I don't want this to be so harsh, you'll see that this writes on. So there it is coming on. If I don't want it to be so harsh, I can just take the opacity down. I could also use what we know about clipping masks and that. I can make a new layer. Yes. I'll give this a selection. I'll open up the mask. I'll feather it. And then I'll make sure that this is above my shadow, and I'll just set this to be an alpha matte. And so now my shadow will only exist where that exists. So here it is without that. It's really dark on the edges. Here it is with that. It's softer on the edges. And I could obviously adjust where this is at if I needed to. Okay. This one was done in the exact same way using an animator. The only difference I have here is that this one is doing a rotate. So if I open up the animator, I have position at 548, I have it scaling, and then I also have a rotate on this. You'll notice that I have an X, Y, and Z rotation. On those things, I can say enable per character 3D, which means that it won't work in just 2D, it'll actually work in 3D. So any movements or scales or rotates can work in a 3D sense. Without that, it looks similar, it just doesn't look exactly like I had it before. And I liked how it had it before because the text was actually coming from behind it. Okay? Just so you can see what that looks like, I'll go to this one. I'll go to Animate. I'll go to Enable Per Character. I'll enable Position. And I'm going to push this really far back in the Z direction, like that. I'll set my start. I'll set my end. Okay, and then I'll even add opacity on here so we don't see, obviously, them sitting way back there in the distance. Okay, and when we go to rotate, we can also rotate these. Again, this is adding too many things probably to this specific one. Let me get rid of my position for a second. Let me get rid of opacity can stay, but I'll set it to 100 for now. So when I go here and I rotate this, watch how it rotates. There we go, that way. Okay, so now it's like they're like turning into the screen. Take the opacity back down to 0 so it starts off at nothing. And a lot of these are going to be subtler on smaller pieces of text. If your quote is a long piece of text, obviously it's going to be very hard to see everything. If I take this and I just wrote hello, and I make this really big, right, it'd be a lot easier to see. Right? And that goes a lot slower too, so let's fix that. There we go. Okay, so just some things to keep in mind as you're working. You're basically going to have some way to scale it or opacity it or something so that it isn't there at the beginning of your screen. You could also use, let me just delete all of these here. Spell it correct. Reveal. There we go. So let's say I want to reveal this piece of text. I'm going to go to my position. I'm going to start it off, let's say here, and then I'll animate it going from 1 and there. Okay, so now it just does this. Make it a little bit faster. Okay, cool. Now obviously I don't want it there at the beginning of my screen, so I'm just going to make sure nothing is selected, use my shape tool, draw a box around where it's going to show up at. I'll give this a color. And then I'm just going to change my reveal track mode to alpha matte. So remember, the way that works is now wherever my shapes intersect, the bottom one will be visible. So now it's coming up like out of nowhere. Okay, so you'll see a lot of this too. Oops, I want the pen tool. When they do this kind of thing, here's my line. I'm going to add a trim path to this. I'll start off at 0, yes. Oops, nope. Start off at the end being a 0. And this will be then at 100. I move the shape up so that lines up better with this. Come on. There we go. That was the wrong one. There we go. Right? So you've seen that probably in commercials and stuff like that. Right? So when you look at things online for motion graphics, text is all over the place. I recommend definitely going and watching any motion graphics demo reels. You'll see typically a lot of them have a lot of text in there because it's a simple thing to animate. When you look at the news, if you look at any of those lower thirds, they don't just like pop on the screen. All of these have ways that they animate into the screen. It's not just like there all of a sudden. So even if we're trying to get ideas for things, things you can add to your demo reel, these kinds of things, animating text on there, animating a name or something, is definitely something that people do. You could even, let's do this. Pen tool again. This. All right, bring that down. Go here to make that smaller. I'm going to move my pivot over here to this. And then I'm just going to animate this sliding it off the screen. So I'll go here. I'll slide that back there. I'll slide this back across. All right, so easy it. And then I'm going to have the slowest part happen right here. So this should be fast. That should be fast. That's how it goes. There we go. Okay, so now that's where my text can go. Spell my name right. You've done it a million times. Show. There we go. Better. Let's make sure we're at the right height, right spacing, right there. Good. How far over do we go? Right there. Cool. I'll add a animator to this. This will just be opacity. And we'll start off at 0. And I will go to my range selector, say start. Go to the end of this. There. So now what should happen? Oh, too fast. You're just too fast. I'm just going to adjust this so that it's timed up better. Oh, still close. Let's scoochie that back here. There we go. Nope. Yeah, don't start yet. That's the problem. You're starting too soon. Still too soon. There we go. It's better. Maybe a couple frames this way. There we go. Right? So that's the kind of stuff that you would see typically in these lower thirds type things. They're all done basically the same way. Now, just so you can see again where this process could go, not this one because it's really specific to that kind of animation, but let's say this one here, okay? So I'm going to take this effect that I've done on this one, and I'm going to grab these two animators that I've used to animate this whole piece coming in. I'm going to go, make sure I'm wound. I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to say Save Preset. Glitchy effects, I've already saved it. And you could save this to your thumb drive or wherever. And then if you get another piece of text animated that you want to animate it the same way, all we have to do is apply that effect and then it'll work the same exact way. So you don't have to like reinvent the wheel. There we go, Glitchy FX. I go here, I go back to my presets. If I don't have it already loaded, I could say Browse, find my preset, and then click on it. Or I could just say, because I just did it, a Glitchy effect. And now when I hit play, there it is. Now it might go slow. That's no big deal because I can just hit U, grab the keyframes, and squish them in. Right? So if I have 1,000 layers that have this text effect on it, it's simple. Just click on it and go. If I'm doing an animation where I have titles that I want animated a certain way, I can have a different one for each one of those. Okay? So by the time you're done, you should have ones that look finished. There's some sort of shadow like this. There's grain. There's a vignette. Something that makes it look more like a complete piece. Okay, this one does not look like a complete piece. This one does not look like a complete piece. Okay. Questions on doing these things? Yes, ma'am. We will have the next text piece I'll go over Wednesday that will just do one word. Yes, sir.
Are we finding new quotes or we're using the same quotes from before?
The quote, you had two quotes that you had. So one of the quotes from before was like this, where we just animated the text individually like that. Okay, so that was one of your quotes. The other quote will be this one. So like on yours, you have two. You animated the Back to the Future one, right? Yeah. Okay, so then the other one, you'll use that. Okay, that's fine. Right. Anything else? No? Okay. I'll be around to check drawings, to